How do you do? We're about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Frankenstein, made infamous by the classic Boris Karloff films of the 1930s, was written by a 19-year-old girl nearly 200 years ago. Mary Shelley's story about a scientist who makes a creature out of human body parts is one of the great modern myths. But where did it come from? Why is it rediscovered by every generation? And why does it speak so forcefully to our own?
The book sings with energy. It's reality cranked up 10 notches in a way. You know, everything is just so in your face in this book. There's no breath taken. It's shock tactics. It's almost a punk book in a way.
It speaks in some way to our fear about what is new and what is unknown. So it's a very useful metaphor to explain how you might respond to those things, whether they're GM crops or stem cell research, or these moments when we take a leap into the unknown, when we stretch the boundaries of what we know and what we imagine to be possible.
It's almost as though she was possessed in writing it, that she had the mental agility to write the first science fiction story, which is, of course, what it is.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Frankenstein eventually became the archetype of the mad scientist and what happens when science overreaches itself. But what's interesting in the story of Frankenstein is that this becomes applied to the idea of creating people. And in some ways, that's something that could be seen as the ultimate unnatural act. And it raises all sorts of quite specific questions about the status of the created being. Is Frankenstein's creature in some sense like us? You know, is he fully human? And if not, then why not?
Frankenstein is such an enduring myth because, at least from my generation, I think it's the first thing they ever saw that frightened them. Like the Wicked Witch and the Wizard of Oz. That sticks with you, the first villain that you secretly love. Even the bad versions, there's rip-off versions, right? The great-granddaughter of Frankenstein, they're all kind of good. It's like Psycho 5.
Dr. Stein!
I'm never mad when they make another one. I don't think it'll ever be used up. I like to see how it can mutate, in a way. Be passed down to generations to make another version.
Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I should be Adam. God was proud of Adam, but Satan's the one I sympathize with. For I was cast out like Satan, though I did no wrong.
The latest manifestation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is director Danny Boyle's sellout production at the National Theatre in London. He had wanted to adapt the novel for the stage for nearly 20 years, but had been distracted by a highly successful cinema career. He decided to create a Frankenstein for our times and to return to the themes of Mary Shelley's original story.
You know, one of those devices that holds the chest open?
Yeah.
What they call?
Chest spreader.
Chest spreader, okay.
Such of those.
Yeah, one of those from 1816, please.
What's extraordinary about working on it is that you realise it's timeless. It will be here a long time after we're all gone, because it swims into focus depending on different issues, either in a very specific way like genetics or cloning, or in a very, very general way, really, about, you know, what man is capable of and what are the repercussions of that.
In writer Nick Dear's adaptation, the creature, rather than the scientist Victor Frankenstein, is given the central role. The production becomes the creature's story and begins with him being literally born on stage.
The idea was to start with the innocence of the child being born. It opened up the whole world because it stripped you of the creature being a monster. Now, a monster is something that frightens you, that's out there. And in fact, what you do by making him a creature is you're saying he's you. He's just like you. And that was the emphasis at the beginning of the production, was to see him recognise things that we go, oh, and the bird song and the rain and all the different things that the sensations of childhood. And that gives a wonderful innocence and simpleness, really, to the beginning of such a complicated idea of creating a human being.
By exploring the idea of artificial life, Mary Shelley raised larger questions about our own origins and mankind's place in the universe.
I think Mary Shelley was writing, almost without appreciating it, a sort of creation myth for the science age. In many cultures there are creation myths, but they always involve a deity, a cosmic power. Something sets the spark of life in motion and we humans come to life. For the first time, Mary Shelley comes up with a creation myth which doesn't involve a deity, doesn't involve cosmic power, it involves solely the skills of humankind. And that's why I think it stays with us now, because God doesn't play a very big part in our rationalization about the world we live in and what we're going to do with it and the extent to which we're destroying it, as we patently are. Mary Shelley's a very highly educated young 18, 19-year-old woman when she comes to it. And the book is stuffed full of ideas which seem to me to remain very pertinent to us now.
My God. Muscular coordination, hand and eye, perfect balance. Excellent tissue the sutras have held.
In 1818, the idea that man could create human life was both shocking and blasphemous.
What an achievement! Unsurpassed in scientific endeavor.
In other eras, she would have been burnt at the stake for challenging God. The idea of challenging God was something that one or two people were playing with, but nobody was really coming out with. And here it was manifested in a story where a man creates another man. And you think, well, who does that exclude? Well, it excludes women on the one hand, but it also excludes God.
Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more.
Nay, more. I myself became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. It's an absolutely, astoundingly shocking thing to say. It's completely heretical. I mean, you might as well have gone up to the Archbishop of Canterbury and slapped him in the face.
I am an anti-Christ. I am an anarchist. Don't know what I want, but I know how to get it. I want to destroy, possibly, 'cause I...
Mary Shelley was no stranger to scandal. At the age of just 16, she had eloped with the young romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was already married. and she herself came from a highly unconventional family.
It's very difficult for us now to realise how remarkable Mary Shelley was as a person, because she is born of these two amazing characters. Her father, William Godwin, is this kind of utopian, extreme avant-garde thinker. He's an atheist. I mean, an atheist at that point, you know, the late 18th century, early 19th century, is an offence against nature. Her mother dies very shortly after she's born. Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the great figurehead of feminism. What an incredible education this woman had.
Like her parents, Mary was fascinated by the revolutionary scientific discoveries that were happening around them.
At the time, the burgeoning of science was extraordinary. And electricity, of course, which is key to the movie animating of the character. They electrify him. Electricity wasn't really invented, or certainly the capability of producing it in any kind of true capacity hadn't really been achieved by them. But it hovers over the book and our adaptation in a literal way. What we did by creating electricity, by giving ourselves the power of lighting up the night, we created a legacy, which we're living through, really, by our devotion to electricity, not God.
The science of Frankenstein is not, in fact, its most important thing. Mary is interested in what it might mean to create life, but she's not particularly interested in the real mechanics of how the creature is created. It's not a how-to manual about how you build a creature from scratch. But she's certainly talking about ideas which are fresh in the thinking of her contemporaries.
At the end of the 18th century, an Italian physician named Luigi Galvani had begun to discover that electricity seemed to have physiological effects. So his classic experiment was to apply electric currents to the limbs of a dead frog, and he would watch them twitch, as if they were coming back to life. Galvani's cousin, Luigi Aldini, conducted similar experiments on criminals who'd been executed and found the same thing. Their limbs would twitch and they would show what seemed to be signs of reanimation.
When Mary was born, she was actually born in a storm, this storm which was being caused by worldwide reverberations, not only a climactic storm, but a storm of thought and revolution around Europe. It's already a very fated beginning. So really, whatever happens to this child is going to be extraordinary. And it's almost as though it's preordained that she should write this amazing book.
Mary and her married lover, Percy Shelley, were a scandalous couple. In 1816, they travelled to Switzerland to escape the hypocrisy and conservatism of English life. And it was here that Frankenstein was born.
Frankenstein is written in an extraordinary period historically, but also geographically. There's a great appeal of Europe, but specifically Switzerland, as this new republic, the land of William Tell and of Rousseau, too. And it's a kind of antidote to this blasted wasteland of Europe itself, which is a post-war landscape. You know, this is after really what was in effect a world war, the Napoleonic Wars. They are a post-war generation. They don't believe in England. You know, they don't believe in the values of England. And they go to Geneva as a kind of new homeland.
The other reason that Mary and Shelley travelled to Switzerland was to meet up with Lord Byron, the most notorious poet of the age, who was having an affair with Mary's sister, Claire.
To begin with, all of them are staying in one of Geneva's hotels. but they quickly feel this is gossipy and claustrophobic. And so within a few days, Byron moves out of the hotel to the Villa Diodati on the shores of the lake. The Villa Diodati is really the setting for the summer. It's where they tend to meet in the evenings after they've been boating on the lake. It's where the famous events of the summer take place.
They set up this kind of commune. I mean, it is like the Rolling Stones in their sort of 60s and 70s, their satanic majesties, you know, it's that same vibe. And they are like rock stars. I mean, Byron is a man who walks around with a condom in his pocket. Shelley is a vile person back in England. You know, he's a man who, like Byron, is suspected of incest, certainly of, you know, carrying away a young girl.
Byron was touring Europe in this specially built coach. He was bankrupt, but he was behaving like he was a rock star. There were rumours that they were all sleeping together and all that kind of stuff. That's the okay people-type gossip that surrounds rock stars, and these were the rock stars of the time.
These people are wreathed in a kind of revolutionary, subversive glamour. And as they're cavorting themselves at the Villa Diodati, there are people hiring telescopes on the other side of the lake so people can spy on the wickedness that's going on there.
The summer they were at the villa was one of the wettest on record and became known as the Summer of Darkness. The party had to spend more and more time indoors and to devise new ways of entertaining themselves.
There had been a great volcanic storm in another part of the world which caused a complete confusion. And I think this contributed to the state of heightened excitement and anticipation and imaginative minds working furiously.
You hear? Come, Mary. Come and watch the storm.
You know how lightning alarms me. Shelley, darling, will you please light these candles for me?
Oh, Mary, darling.
What we do know is that Byron seems to suggest that everyone should write a ghost story. This causes something of panic in Mary because everyone else gets going and she can't think of one, and every morning she's asked to think of one and she has to say that she can't. Until one night she has what she describes as a waking dream in which she sees a vision of her novel in a kind of hallucinatory state.
When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life.
Frankenstein is really born out of a hyper-tense state. The sheer sort of frenzied, almost drug-like state that they work themselves up into.
It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out.
When, in the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open.
This is the original manuscript of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It was originally in a notebook, which she purchased in Geneva, and it's now in loose sheets. Bodleian paid £3 million for the manuscript, which gives you some idea of its remarkable impact and significance. You can still see it's an original manuscript, even though the sense of the notebook has gone, because we can see Mary Shelley changing her mind, we can see her revising. So it still has the feeling of creation, if you like. It is the moment, the very moment that she is crafting this great novel.
It's timeless in the imagination of the story, in the boldness of that sweep towards telling a story like that. And we take that for granted now because we're so familiar with science fiction. But at the time, to write something with that leap in it took an extraordinary mind.
Mary is very young when she writes at 18, 19. And the repercussions of the summer emotionally will go right through the lives of everyone until they die. It is a novel which comes out of friendship and out of conversations, but also out of pain. When they leave Geneva, terrible events happen. Her half-sister Fanny, who is Wollstonecraft's elder daughter, commits suicide. Only a few weeks later, Shelley's first wife, Harriet, drowns herself in the Serpentine. Mary, by this point, has given birth to a child. She has also lost a child. She has lost her mother. She has come to terms with being the daughter of a woman who is a social outcast. So these things are happening as Mary is writing Frankenstein.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go.
The novel also reflected some of the deepest moral issues of the time, such as the shameful problem of slavery.
Mary had spent some time before she went out to Geneva in Bristol. And even though slavery had been officially abolished, there were many former slaves still living in that area. Mary would have encountered people, she would have encountered stories, and she and Shelley were very, very distressed by the situation of the slave and the way they were treated.
Black people were brought to London to be shown off. They were painted. They were treated rather like the creature is treated in the novel. And it's an extremely emotional and, I think, powerful account of what it is like to be outcast because you look different to other people.
You alone have the power to create another monster, another brute. No, I will not. It is my right. You have no rights. You are a slave.
One of the tragedies of the piece is that everybody thinks the creature is called Frankenstein. He seems to carry the name of his creator, who is called Dr. Frankenstein. He's treated literally as a number or as nothing, really. He isn't given the dignity of a name.
I'm halfway up a mountain debating with a living creature. And nothing! A filthy mass of nothing! You abandoned me. It speaks. Yes, Frankenstein, it speaks.
Mary Shelley's novel centers on the tragic and destructive relationship between Victor Frankenstein and the creature.
Why did you abandon me? I was terrified. What had I done? Built a man and given him life.
The whole idea of the story is that he creates someone in his own likeness, if you like. Maybe not physically in his own likeness, because he's repelled by that, but mentally, he absolutely creates a mirror brain. You know, someone who is capable of debating with him.
So you make sport with my life in the cause of science.
The whole point of this really is to have the characters fusing. That's the fantastic thing about this story, is the relationship between father and son, master and slave, creature and creator.
I will dedicate myself. I will not rest until I desolate your heart!
Danny Boyle came up with a striking way of highlighting the duality of the relationship.
We decided to enhance this idea of the creator and the created by getting a couple of great actors to swap the parts. Literally, one night they would be the created creature, and the next night they'd become the creator, the scientist, Frankenstein. If you can find the right two actors who can approach it in the right way, they feed off each other, they're challenging each other the whole time. And of course, that is a mirror of the relationship of Victor and the creature.
Take my hand, we sealed the bargain.
What I've started to do, and I noticed you did it yesterday actually, bits of my creature go into Victor.
Yeah.
And Victor, our creature, he has a stammer and a stutter slightly, and I have some of that come into Victor at the end.
I looked at stroke victims in recovery. I looked at people who'd had severe injuries, both in wars or car crashes, trying to re-educate their limbs and their bodies. And when you see that happening, the amount of vulnerability, it's a very endearing thing to watch evolve. You really care for him.
Drop down.
Naturally.
There's a lot of my 2-year-old in the creature. It's a blank canvas as a body, but the brain works extremely fast. It's a fully grown brain, so it's absorbing everything super quick. All the learning comes really quickly.
What we've tried to do is begin with a being fresh from birth, with no language. We see him acquire language, we see him acquire intellect, and then by the end of the play, we allow him a very high level of articulacy. And that was one of the reasons that we wanted to do it, was because we'd never seen this creature given a voice, both to justify himself and to question his creator and say, why did you do this?
I think a lot of people won't know the novel, but they will know the movies, which robs him of his voice, really. That's the movies just waded in there and robbed him of his voice straight away. And yet that is the most extraordinary thing.
I sweep to my revenge!
There's certain things that he does that in other narrative forms would lose you all sympathy for him. Like he kills a child, he burns a house with an old blind man down in it, and yet in the play, because you've kind of inhabited his point of view and you understand in some way why these things are happening, regrettable though they are, you kind of retain sympathy for him.
Once, I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. I was nourished with high thoughts of honor and devotion. But now crime has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. What is startling about the book is that you do get the voice of this person who is so reviled, and the voice is a very human voice. It's a human who's done terrible things. And as much as Frankenstein attempts to say, you are not like me, you are not like anybody else, you are disgusting, this person says, no, I am part of you. You brought me into being. You made me.
The crucial moment in the novel is when Frankenstein first sees the creature he has made and is so repelled that he rejects him.
No.
One of the questions that the novel asks is about responsibility, about whether it's Frankenstein or his creature who should take responsibility for the terrible events which ensue. And Mary Shelley is certainly very critical of Frankenstein for leaving his creature to fend for himself, for abandoning his parental duties.
You do as I say!
He never sees the creature as his child. And Mary is crystal clear on this, that Victor lets his creation down. He does not offer him love. He does not try to tutor him. He assumes evil of the creature because of the way he looks. The thing that Mary, her parents, and Shelley believed in profoundly was the nurture of the child and the giving of kindness and understanding. And if we don't understand that about Frankenstein, we can't really ever understand the book.
And the vipers of vengeance shall spit their venom. Therefore come unto the Lord.
The child who grows up in an atmosphere of fear or hostility from a parent is a child whose environment is very hostile and unfriendly. So it's very up to date in terms of what we know about parenting. We know that neglect and abandonment do set children up at risk. 80% of our people have experienced childhood abuse and neglect, which is about 4 or 5 times the national average. I've just come from a meeting where we discussed a man who had a mother who clearly disliked him greatly, and let him know that. And so he grew up with that type of hostile gaze, and he finds himself very angry with women some, 10 years later, mounting vicious attacks on female members of staff. I think it's very interesting how the creature is just longing for someone to attach to. Absolute longing for someone to attach to. If you just make me someone that I can connect to, I'll go away and never bother you again. Tragic.
Here is my request. I wish to be part of society, but no human being will associate with me, but one of my own kind, one just as deformed and horrible. She would understand. But I want a female built like me. A female! You did this!
When he first asks for a female, for a mate, he says, because I am lonely. Why does he deserve this? Because I am lonely. And it's every creature in the world deserves a mate.
Every creature has a mate, every bird in the sky. Even you are to be married.
She obviously experienced great loneliness and wrote about it very instinctively. It occupies the novel constantly as a theme.
In the novel, sympathy with which the creature is depicted is really striking, and is of course something which has rather got lost from the way in which the Frankenstein myth has evolved. One of the most interesting things is the way in which the creature relates his experience of being somehow other, of looking different, of feeling different, of looking in some way shocking. At one point, in a moment which is very evocative of Paradise Lost, when Eve looks into the pool, the creature looks into a pool for the first time and is horrified by his own reflection.
I think I saw Frankenstein for the first time on television. And when it came on, I just remember my parents not wanting me to see the scene where he kills the little girl.
I can make a boat.
And at first, you're not sure he did, but that's why it's such a great scene. And amazing that that scene, for its time, was not censored. Because showing somebody kill a child, even today, never makes you like that movie. I just remember that scene with the girl and his look. And him being so sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to monsters. And I guess that was one of the first ones that ever entered my consciousness as a child. Maybe he's the first person that was not guilty of murder by reason of insanity, because he did not have intent. He did not know what he was doing. So today he would be found not guilty by reason of insanity with a good look. And certainly that always influenced me. Divine was my Frankenstein, we always say, to scare hippies. Everybody creates their own monsters today. For fiction, for any kind of writing, you create your own monsters. To me, the villain was always more appealing. I wanted the monster to kill more people with it. I was never for the payback at the end. I do believe that everybody is born not guilty. I believe that people become monsters themselves because of what happens to them. But there are some people that there's something wrong too, something radically wrong, that don't deserve a second chance, that are pernicious, that will do it again and again and again and have no conscience, no feelings in any way. But those aren't interesting monsters to me. They won't last like Frankenstein's monster.
think there's something about this very childish wish that we can see monstrousness. It's for real, it's clear. And we'll know it when we see it. And yet, you know, we keep constantly being surprised by... But he didn't seem like that. He didn't seem like... Well, what did you think he was going to be like? Many of our people, if you met them in the street, do not look like monsters. We have plenty of people who look just like a man you meet down the pub. It becomes a very important mythology to create the idea that these people are not like us. They're highly deviant. They are very, very different. And it's a way of not looking at everyone's capacity for cruelty, everyone's capacity to have mad thoughts and mad justifications for the things that they do. That, you know, the small hurts that we inflict on each other on a daily basis, we always have a good reason for. The people in our hospital, you know, often have a very similar story, just writ a bit larger.
My heart is black. It stinks. My mind, once filled with dreams of beauty, is a furnace of revenge.
I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grasped to death his throat who never injured me or any other living thing. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes, when that imagination will haunt my thoughts no more.
Frightened of thunder, fearful of the dark, and yet you have written a tale that sent my blood into icy creeps. Look at her, Shelley. Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves? Isn't it astonishing?
I don't know why you should think so. What do you expect? Such an audience needs something stronger than a pretty little love story. So why shouldn't I write of monsters?
No wonder
The dangers that Mary Shelley foresaw nearly 200 years ago feel even more urgent in our own scientific age. Science is now capable of things that she could only imagine, and we are more suspicious than ever of scientists like Victor Frankenstein.
No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. If I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter,
I might, in the process of time, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. One of the key lessons in the book is about how decisions are made about science and technology. So you have in the story really just one man discovering the secret of life and making his own decision about what he's going to do with that. And the book is partly a warning about too much power being concentrated in one man's hands.
You are the only one of your species, and that is how you will stay.
Frankenstein certainly doesn't set out to create anything evil. He begins as someone who is simply obsessed, really, by this knowledge.
I have brought torrents of light to a darkening world.
But because of that obsession, he shuts himself away from human relationships, and particularly from the relationship he has with his fiancée.
I have never doubted your brilliance.
I have beaten death. I have done it. I made a living thing.
But if you wanted to create life...
That's exactly what I wanted.
Then why not just give me a child?
One of the messages that comes across from the story, that it's not necessarily intrinsically bad to want this sort of knowledge. but that if one lets that become an obsession at the expense of human relationships, then you're going to pay the price for it.
One of the big issues with engineering life is how can you recall it if something goes wrong? So if you talk about genetic pollution compared to other historical forms of pollution, the big question is, can you clean it up? If something does go wrong, is the problem going to be retrievable? You can order DNA sequences over the internet, you can set up your own mini lab, and there are concerns that somebody in that situation could, in some ways, emulate what Frankenstein was doing by doing their own research with no public scrutiny and basically using their own imagination to create organisms that could be harmful. I think we're a very long way from genetically engineering human beings, but there is real concern, especially when you talk about selection of embryos, for example, choosing children. We can't engineer children, but we can select embryos now. And is that something that we really want to do, even if it's avoiding a terrible disease? What does it mean to start to try and choose our biological characteristics?
We're now told that what it takes to make a human being is a genetic code, that somehow a genome can be patched together in the same way as limbs could be patched together by Victor Frankenstein. And I think it's very clear that all of the traditional fears that surround those ideas are now transferred onto the genome. Will the artificial being have a soul? At what stage do we cross the line between humanity and something else? And Frankenstein becomes a vehicle for starting to think about some of these difficult questions.
It's both very forward-looking and it's also very anxious, at least, about where science will take it. I think it endures because we want to know who made us, really. And how far back does that process of being made go? Does it go right the way back to God? Does it go just to the point of sexual union? Or is there something you can interfere with? And that's why we're obsessed with it.
I think the reason why the book reverberates is because the monster isn't innocent. His predicament seems to reflect our own sense of unease in the world, where we become detached from nature. And she's created an innocent creature. It's our fault, really, what happens to him. We're the people to blame.
The book seems to me to be profoundly about a calling out for understanding rather than condemnation. The idea that you could create something of yourself, and there's a part of yourself that would be murderous and vengeful and beaten and vulnerable and terribly, terribly sad.
All I wanted was your love.
Mary Shelley's life became a tragedy of its own when her adored husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, died in a storm at the age of 29. She returned to England a widow and was haunted for the rest of her life by her reputation as the author of the scandalous novel Frankenstein.
This rather wonderful 19th century monument is to the memory of Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband, who drowned off the coast of Italy in 1822, only 8 years after they had first eloped from England. And it's an amazingly morbid, romantic image. It's like a classical Pietà, only instead of Christ taken down from the cross, it's the drowned poet with seaweed and his kind of winding cloth around him in the arms of Mary, the grieving widow with her husband languorously, almost sensually in her arms. And there's definitely a sense of eroticism in a way. It's almost a post-coital image rather than an image of death. And the inscription here really tells the story in the bare words, in the names themselves in a way. Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. I mean, that was a name which was persona non grata in her lifetime. She represented, to many people, evil. And it's strange, isn't it? Because we have these two incredible rebels and anarchists, revolutionaries, atheists, mortared here into the wall of a medieval priory.
I was working in the lab late one night.
Talk about a career-making look. Sometimes just a look is what's remembered forever. I mean, getting bolts in your head and everything, isn't that punk rock? Finally, people are doing that for real.
It was a graveyard smash.
It inspired so many things. It inspired jokes, it inspired parody. I mean, my favorite, The Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett, who became #1 3 separate times, I believe.
The ghouls all came from their humble abodes to get a jolt from my electrode.
He sang it his whole life and imagining having one hit. It's easier. You don't have to think of something every day. You never have to reinvent yourself. You just get up and sing The Monster Mash.
It caught on in a flash. They did the mash. They did the Monster Mash.
I still do the Monster Mash. I've done the Monster Mash in my life at some of the most extreme moments, even with scary people I brought into my house. They'll just put on the Monster Mash. You're always safe.
The scene was rocking, all were digging the sounds. Igor on chains, backed by his baying hounds. The coffin bangers were about to arrive with their vocal group, the Crypt Kicker.
The Wizard of Oz with Zombies is back for part 2 of Apocalypse. Join Derren Brown as he continues to turn one man's world upside down Friday at 9. But coming up, shortlisted for the Barclaycard Mercury Prize, 4 talks to the Maccabees next.
Mash